Well, welcome to everyone, and a big thank you for joining this first session of our two-part webinar, which is an introduction to the IATI Standard within the humanitarian context. I hope you can all hear me fine. I'm pleased to see we have about, I think we've got 32 organisations participating from many different stakeholder groups. We've got government donors, UN agencies, and a number of NGOs. To introduce ourselves, I'm Liz, a consultant with Development Initiatives working on the project Monitoring the Grand Bargain Transparency Commitment. And I'll be co-hosting this session with Wendy, who's IATI's Senior Business and Data Analyst. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Liz.
So the session will last approximately 1 hour in total. We're hoping to keep to time. And we've split it into 3 parts with a question and answer session after each one. As we're running through the presentation, please do send us your questions in the question box on your screen. And you'll see this by clicking on, I think it's the 3rd grey arrow down on the control panel. At the end of each part of the presentation, we'll be responding to as many questions as we can, and we may ask some of you to repeat them to the whole group. For any questions we don't have time to answer, we'll be sending out responses together with a recording of this webinar and the presentation slides in the next few days. And just a reminder that the second session of this webinar is on Thursday, the 2nd of March. At the same time. So if you're all fired up at the end of this and want to dive into the more technical detail of how to publish to IATI, please do register, and you'll find the link on the original invite, and we'll also provide it at the end of this session. So if we move on to the agenda, in the first part of this session, we'll provide an overview of the Grand Bargain process, as well as a specific commitment on transparency that was made at the World Humanitarian Summit in May 2016. We'll also update you on how we'll be working with Grand Bargain signatories on monitoring the commitment on transparency, and explain how this links to other initiatives in the sector. The second part of the presentation will explain what IATI is, how it can benefit the humanitarian community, examining who needs the data and how IATI data is already being used, as well as potential new uses. And the final part will address the mechanics of becoming an IATI publisher, including how to take forward transparency within your organizations and some of the key issues you may need to consider. And finally, we'll look at next steps and take some final questions. So let's get started. What is the Grand Bargain? Well, in 2016, the then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called on global leaders and humanitarian actors to take action on 5 core responsibilities as part of his Agenda for Humanity. At the World Humanitarian Summit in May 2016, the humanitarian community came together to pledge initiatives, partnerships, and alliances to help implement these core commitments. The Grand Bargain was one of these initiatives. It was first proposed by the UN Secretary General's high-level panel report on humanitarian financing as one of the solutions to address the humanitarian financing gap. The panel recognized that in order to close the humanitarian financing gap, there's a need for greater efficiency and effectiveness in the way that it's being spent. So the Grand Bargain presents a kind of quid pro quo between humanitarian donors and implementing organizations to improve humanitarian response. I'd say ultimately the Grand Bargain's purpose, and I would say our common purpose, is to ensure a better humanitarian response for crisis-affected people. Grand Bargain signatories agreed a shared commitment to better serve people in need. This encompasses 10 commitments, and you can see them listed on the slide, in a number of areas, including greater transparency, more support and funding to local and national responders, increasing cash-based programming, and more harmonized and simplified reporting. So work streams have been established for each commitment area and are being co-convened by 2 of the Grand Bargain participating organizations. So ICVA, the International Council for Voluntary Agencies, Interaction, Mercy Corps, World Vision International, and UNHCR are currently members of the Grand Bargain workstream on transparency. which is being co-convened by the Netherlands and the World Bank. And we welcome new members, so please get in touch if you want to join. Monitoring implementation of these commitments can be done individually by organisations. However, an independent monitoring report is also planned, and there will be an opportunity to report back at an annual meeting in the margins of the ECOSOC Humanitarian Affairs segment, and the next one will be in June 2017. So as you can see, the Grand Bargain is a truly multi-stakeholder initiative involving leading donor governments, multilateral and UN agencies, international non-governmental organisations and networks, the International Committee of the Red Cross and the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Currently there are over 50 signatories, increasing as organisations continue to sign up to the Grand Bargain. And I think CAFOD, Caritas and the Irish Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade are the most recent additions. And you can find a full list at the Grand Bargain page of the agendaforhumanity.org website, which I've also put on the slide. So the Grand Bargain recognises that we need greater transparency from implementing organisations to improve decision-making and accountability. So for example, the earthquake in Nepal and the Ebola crisis in West Africa demonstrated that a lack of comparable and real-time data on funding led to a kind of decision-making in the dark. So Grand Bargain signatories agreed that while it can be no silver bullet, the International Aid Transparency Initiative is currently the most advanced option for a shared open data standard for publishing data on humanitarian funding. The commitment also covers other aspects of improved transparency, including reporting of the data to a data platform, improving the use of data analysis for humanitarian decision-making, and building the capacity of all actors to share and use data. So implementing the Grand Bargain commitment on transparency really does provide us with an unprecedented opportunity for more political momentum and action to improve the quality, availability, and use of data on crisis-related financing. As I said earlier, I'm going to explain more about the project monitoring the Grand Bargain commitment on transparency that Wendy and I are working on. We know that the transparency commitment can appear a daunting ask at a time when there are many demands on agencies. So we're here to better understand what it's like from you, from your perspective, and guide you through this process to make it as easy as possible. The project is being led by Development Initiatives and funded by the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs and runs until June 2018. It's got two main outcomes, which I've put up here. Increased understanding of incentives and challenges to IATI publication, and increased capacity to publish and use data. So to achieve these, we'll be working with Grand Bargain signatories to raise awareness of the IATI Standard and understand better the incentives and some of the challenges to publication that we know organisations face, consult on the IATI Standard and ensure that it continues to meet the needs of the humanitarian community, improve technical capacity to publish and use humanitarian aid data with guidance material and bespoke support, and to support signatories in the wider humanitarian community in monitoring progress against the transparency commitment. Ultimately, our aim is to increase the availability of timely, transparent, harmonised and open high-quality data on humanitarian funding to enable better decision-making, greater accountability and learning. So here are some of the key project milestones. To begin understanding organisations' perspectives on the publication of quality data on humanitarian activities, we'll be conducting an online survey and key informant interviews with Grand Bargain signatories over the period February to March 2017. And we'll be sending out a link to the survey as part of the follow-up to this webinar. We'll also be carrying out consultation workshops and bilateral meetings with Grand Bargain signatories to develop recommendations and a roadmap for going forward. And these are planned for the end of March in Geneva, hopefully as part of a side event at the ICFA annual general meeting in March, and in April in New York. During this period, we'll also be consulting with signatories and the humanitarian community more broadly, firstly to review the humanitarian elements of the IATI Standard, and secondly to develop a monitoring methodology and an online dashboard to support the monitoring process. So this will enable humanitarian organisations to check their own progress and address any data quality issues. At the end of this phase, in May 2017, we'll be publishing a baseline assessment with some recommendations on proposed improvements to the standard and a roadmap for the way forward. Then we've got 2 snapshot monitoring reports planned for October 2017 and February 2018, and a final monitoring report planned for May 2018. We'll also be reaching out to existing support structures within the IATI community, including the Secretariat's technical support team, interdepartmental working groups within member organisations, and some of the external support networks that exist, such as Bond or Partos for the NGO community, to encourage peer-to-peer learning. So how will the project work with others? Well, clearly it will be important to reach out to other relevant processes to facilitate information exchange and promote collaboration during the course of the project. Because transparency is a cross-cutting issue, we'll aim to work closely with all the relevant Grand Bargain work streams. For example, with the work stream on harmonised and simplified reporting, to identify opportunities for IATI to contribute to reducing the reporting burden of implementing partners. We know this is a key concern. The Interagency Standing Committee's Humanitarian Finance and Task Team is taking forward a number of transparency-related activities linked to the Grand Bargain work streams, for example, by providing recommendations on improving the traceability of funding, by the development of a localization marker to track financing that's channeled through local and national responders in crisis situations. As part of the work of the Humanitarian Financing Task Team, OCHA's Financial Tracking Service is working with IATI to develop technical guidance so that IATI data can be automatically imported into the FTS platform. And Wendy will go into more detail on that later in the presentation. The Humanitarian Data Centre was also launched at the summit with the aim of becoming a humanitarian data hub. So the centre won't address the technical aspects of publishing to IATI, but it is being set up to build capacity within the humanitarian community on data literacy and developing data policies. So we look forward to working with them to explore opportunities for collaboration. Finally, we'll continue to work with the wider IATI community to share lessons and feedback from all the consultations on how to enhance the standard from a humanitarian perspective, as IATI is the decision-making body on any potential inclusions to the standard. So, any questions so far? If you have, please do type them in the chat box. Do you want to read that out?
Hi everyone, just to let you know, we've got one question here that's been asked, so thank you very much for that. Just about the Humanitarian Data Centre. The question is, can we say a little bit more about what collaboration with that would look like? I think I'm happy to say a few words really, is to say probably at this stage we're not really too sure. It's quite early on in terms of the development of the data centre. We're obviously going to be working and staying joined up with that particular project as it develops. We know that already, IATI is going to be one of the data sources that they will be looking to use through the centre. But as I say, currently there's still sort of ongoing discussions about exactly what it's going to do and how it's going to work. So hopefully that will become a little bit more clear over the next coming months.
Any more questions?
So I think we just had another question saying, if we want to contribute to your study on the use of IATI, how should we reach out?
Yes, please. We'll be sending out at the end of the webinar session. We'll be sending out some contact details and some follow-up to the webinar. So please do get in touch with us directly. Absolutely.
Okay, if there isn't any more questions then, we shall move on. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about what IATI actually is and how it can help the humanitarian community. So essentially, the one thing to know about IATI is that it is an initiative and that it is not an IT system. I think generally when people first become aware of IATI, that they think that it is an IT system, but I can confirm that it's not. The IATI, the whole initiative revolves around the Open Data Standard. So what IATI is about providing an open data standard which essentially defines the formatting for any organisation to publish information about the work that they do in terms of making that data open source, so making it available to anyone. So that is really the essence of what IATI is about. It's very much around, as I say, the formatting and the specification that the standard provides to make sure that data can be provided that can be used by anyone across the community. I should add, it is a voluntary standard. We do know that there are certain donors, for instance, who do actually mandate it as part of their grant-giving processes, but generally IATI remains a voluntary standard, which means a lot of what you can publish is down to the organisation who's providing the data. And it's very much a multi-stakeholder initiative as well, so we work very closely with our quite wide-ranging community of stakeholders who come from many different types of organisations in terms of developing the standard to make sure it remains relevant and is fit for purpose to use, because we're very aware that the whole sort of operational environment that many of you listening today are involved in is a constantly changing environment, and so it's one that we need to make sure that the standard reflects. In terms of where it came from, it was originally conceived and came out of the Global Partnership High-Level Forums for Unaid Effectiveness. So for those of you that aren't sure what the Global Partnership is, it's a senior level, quite a senior level, high-level forum that essentially brings together donor governments, bilateral, multilateral organisations, civil society, representatives from parliaments, and the private sector. So all stakeholders who were and still are essentially interested in improving their development cooperation. However, I should say that the scope of IATI is much wider now than just development cooperation, and that was always the intention that it should be. So essentially any financial flow or anything relating to aid can generally be reported through IATI. So if you have monies or funding relating to private finance or humanitarian, IATI is constantly being developed to make sure that we can capture that information efficiently. In terms of why that IATI is even needed, well, we know there's a lot of information currently available, but quite often a lot of it is in very different formats. It can be held internally by organisations, not necessarily made public. Lots of organisations will put PDFs on their websites, and there's a huge amount of information out there provided by organisations. But what IATI does is it provides that format, that specification, so that information can be provided in a consistent way. So if all organisations are publishing their data in the same way, using the same format, then obviously that information is much more valuable in that it can be, you can compare organisations, it's easier to bring different data sources together to look at things from an aggregated perspective. It's obviously coming from a whole range of actors, all the organisation types that I mentioned that are very much part of the IATI community. And the information is all in one place, and it's open to anyone, so that information is in the public domain, it's there to be used. And in terms of who needs it, well, we have, again, a whole range of possible data users, and this is probably just a small snapshot of them. Obviously, donors are interested in terms of how the money that they're being provided is being spent, and in terms of monitoring progress. People in the field actually doing the work, the implementing agencies who are delivering in terms of the various interventions, administrative bodies of disaster areas, impacted communities. Pretty much everyone has data that they need. And the one thing about IATI is that a lot of the core data that is needed by all of these different actors, quite a lot of it actually is the same. So by having that data sort of channeled through and provided through IATI publishing, means that the same data is in the same place and can be used as required by the various sort of data user sets that we have. A lot of you may be thinking, well, hang on a minute, isn't that what OCHA's financial tracking service does? Isn't that what it's doing in terms of bringing information together? So quite often we get asked, why do we actually need both? And the fact is really they're very much complementary. In terms of FTS is an IT system. I said at the beginning that IATI isn't. Well, FTS clearly is an IT system, and it uses the IATI data. So the IATI data can be used by FTS, and the FTS is able to import the information directly so that it doesn't have to be manually keyed or curated, and can be processed obviously by machines, by computers, much more easily than having to manually curate and validate and process the information. So FTS themselves have been working on their own systems and are already starting to look at this whole importing of IATI, with the idea being that organisations will no longer, if they are producing good quality IATI data, you won't need to then report separately to FTS about any work that you might be doing. In terms of who else is using the data, well, we certainly know that partner country governments, who were the original intended primary users of IATI data, are using it. So IATI data is there to inform and provide budget support to partner country governments, and that is happening. So we have a number of IT providers who have developed and deployed aid information management systems. And most, in fact, all of the suppliers that we work with are already looking at developing and are starting to import IATI data directly into those systems so they can be used in a complementary way to the partner country governments' other financial systems in terms of budget management. I also should say as well that quite often these aid information management systems are public. And so in some cases you can actually go, and anyone can go and have a look and see what information that they actually hold. Similarly, we know IATI data is being used in quite a big way by donors. Many donors, as those that are on this particular slide, have built their own open data web portals, which are actually using the data that they are using to display is actually coming from their own published IATI data. So they are very much using their own data that they produce effectively. We also know as well that some of the donor governments as well are starting to look at using the imported IATI data, not just in terms of their public-facing web portals, but also internally in relation to their own management information. Similarly, we know that NGOs, media, data analysts as well are starting to use and very much using IATI data. In terms of, for NGOs particularly, they look at it when they are commissioning new projects to see who else might be working in a particular country or region or area that they are planning to work. You know, we've had certainly stories back from NGOs who have told us that they've been able to identify partner organisations to work with as a result. A lot of NGOs as well tend to use these various portals as well for keeping their senior managers informed, because it provides a good way of them verifying the information that they're publishing, but also in terms of reflecting it back into their own organisations. And they do find that particularly useful. And other uses in the pipeline. So I've already mentioned FTS, that very much is being built from an IATI perspective in order to be able to import IATI data. So if you're publishing IATI data directly into their systems, which obviously saves them manpower and resources and having to process, and as I say, not to manually curate the information, but also is a benefit for those publishing organisations that you won't have to report to FTS separately either. Similarly as well, we know that, again, some donors or fund providers are looking to use IATI data in terms of monitoring results and financial reporting. So using the information provided through IATI to effectively try and reduce the reporting burden that grantees often have in relation to their donors. So just to sort of finish up on this section, just a little bit really about how IATI is managed and run. So any organisation can basically become a member of IATI, and as a result becomes part of the members' assembly. So all organisations that are members do pay a membership fee, very much on a sliding scale. So obviously the very large organisations do tend to pay much more than the smaller organisations. And from the member assembly essentially then votes on to and sets up the representatives on the governing board who give this sort of day-to-day oversight really in terms of how IATI is run. We also have a very active technical advisory group, or the TAG as it's known, which is essentially the IATI user group. We actually are due to have, some of you may be attending, the annual TAG conference is due to take place in Tanzania in a couple of weeks' time, where we will be having a huge number of the IATI community coming together to talk about all aspects of IATI, from data use and publication to future uses and everything. And in terms of the day-to-day management, we have a secretariat And this is, I'm effectively part of the Secretariat as part of the IATI technical team. Our role is very much around both the management of the IATI standards, so working with the IATI community to, as I say, to make sure it stays up to date, but also providing day-to-day support to publishers and data users. So as you get further into the publishing process and may find you need some assistance, then obviously part of our role is to help all organisations with that. Okay, so I don't know if there's any questions that have come out of that. So let's just have a look. So we're just checking through your questions. Do you want to read those? I'm just checking your questions here.
Right. Maybe is there anybody we can actually go to?
Bear with us on this moment. It's just in very small type at the moment, so we're just trying to read it.
Gosh, we've got lots of questions.
Yeah.
Wendy. We just need to try and.
Okay. Do you want to read one out?
You mentioned potential improvements to the standard. Can you expand on the potential scope of this based on conversations to date? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're looking at the standard in terms of humanitarian reporting is obviously a big topic at the moment. So we are looking in terms of, there are some issues around the standard at the moment, particularly for things such as forward-looking data. So this is actually providing forward-looking budget information, and we recognise that this can be a challenge for humanitarian organisations, for instance, particularly in rapid onset emergencies. So we are looking to enhance the standard to allow exceptions where they are relevant, in terms of where it may just not be possible to provide certain types of information because of operational requirements. We're also looking to extend the standard as well to encompass sort of things such as like pledges. At the moment it doesn't support pledges, so we're looking to enhance it for that. There's also various other discussions, many discussions going on about all areas of the standard as well. So, things as diverse from increasing the number of organisation types that are currently allowed to be reported on, which I think is an issue around the whole sort of monitoring of localisation, for instance.
I think the key message, Wendy, is just to sort of stress that this is the project provides a real opportunity for further outreach to the humanitarian community, and we really want to hear from you when we're doing the consultation process, what you'd like to see as potential inclusions to the standard. So please do engage with us on that, and we will be reaching out to you as well. Should we go into another question? That was one. Okay, so there's a question here about do you, further up, the IATI standard is very flexible, meaning that standardization across NGOs and donors, etc., will be very difficult, in my opinion. Do you have anything in mind to try and reduce the variations?
No, that's a good point, really. I mean, the standard has to be all things to all publishers, really. So it's actually very difficult, as you say, to try and get a standard that is flexible. I mean, we do try and aim to make sure that the standard is as fair to and as flexible for publishers as we can possibly make it. And the main thing we do is obviously working with the community to make sure that happens. I mean, I certainly echo what Liz was just saying. We certainly don't pretend that we have all the answers, and that we know about what's best and how we need to amend or enhance the standard, to accommodate for everyone. So we very much try and work with the community as widely as we can. Sometimes we do have to. Make we don't particularly want to make exceptions or whatever. Sometimes we do have to slightly compromise, but we very much try not to do that where we can. Is there another one? Yes.
There's a question here. If we can scroll down, we'll just take a few more. Okay. Right. Okay. Here we go. By the way, just so you know, we're getting a lot of questions through. So anything we don't answer now, we will pick up, and we'll be sending out a summary of all the questions with our answers at the end of the webinar. We've got a question here from Annette. Is membership a prerequisite for publishing?
No.
No.
in an answer, no, not at all. There's no requirement to be a member. It's we certainly welcome any organisation that wants to publish is very much welcome to do so.
And another question here about German donors and IATI, for example, the Foreign Office and BMZ. Well, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong here, Wendy, BMZ is publishing to IATI.
Yeah, that's correct.
But however, the Foreign Office is not yet publishing, and of course, we would very much like to see the Foreign Office publishing to IATI, and are open to discussions on that. Shall we move on to the next part of the presentation?
Yeah.
And keep the questions coming through, as
yes,
I say.
Please keep asking questions, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. If not now, at the end of the session, depending on how much time we have. So hopefully we can cover those off. Okay. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more now about what it means to become an IATI publisher. Essentially, once an organisation, decides that that's what they want to do, they want to become a publisher. What we need them to understand is actually that there is a commitment here, and what we're really asking is that it's a commitment, as it says there, to regularly provide quality publicly available information about the work that you do. So really, once you start publishing, we are looking for organisations to be continually updating their information, keeping it fresh and up to date, making it as timely as they can, so that information remains as usable as it can to the wider community. One of the things we do recommend as well is that you don't necessarily think about publishing as just a technical exercise. Implementing IATI actually goes much wider than that. It's like any business change for an organisation. It means thinking about your own policies, an organisation's business processes, its resources, and then essentially the tech component, which is, so the bit that comes at the end when you're producing your IATI data should be the end of that whole process. We certainly recommend that quite a lot of time and thought is put into just thinking about how your organisation is going to adapt and publish to IATI, because even something, IATI is about a part of becoming a transparent organisation, and very much that involves a big culture shift for any organisation. If you're used to working in a relatively sort of private or closed environment, suddenly moving to a position where you're putting information about everything you do into the public domain can be quite a different way of working. So we always when we're working with publishers, get them to think about the softer side of the implementation, not just the hard data and the publishing, but to think about the organisation's policies, about its resourcing, and how it can maintain its IATI publishing over time. And in terms of the publishing policies that we have, these are the sorts of things that you'll need to think about. So in the very early stages, in terms of what your unit of aid might be, in IATI we talk about activities, and an activity can be anything that makes sense to a publisher. So it could be an intervention, it could be a project, a program, a grant. It really depends how you work, how you manage your own operation, how you manage the work that you do. Probably the majority of organisations that already publish, their unit of aid will tend to be a project, and that's quite quite a standard sort of activity to use. But that's not true of all organisations, so that's something to think about, and you want to make sure you get that right at the beginning, because it makes the publishing process much easier. In addition as well, how often you're going to publish, the recommended frequencies that we like our publishers to publish at least quarterly, ideally monthly. And obviously from a humanitarian perspective, we're even starting to think more frequently than that, particularly in rapid onset emergencies as well. So that's an area we'll be looking at. Data timeliness, how up to date is your data? So you might be publishing every month, but you might only be putting data that's actually a year old out into the public domain. So we're interested in its timeliness, how up to date is it? The quality of that data, is it comprehensive? Is that data actually useful for someone? Does it actually tell a data user about the work that you're doing? Is its content meaningful? And similarly, coverage as well. Are you going to publish information about everything that you do, or maybe just a subset? Again, we certainly recommend to our new publishers that, we don't expect them to publish good, fantastically detailed information about everything from day one. Quite often a publisher will start with a small subset, and then each time that they publish, maybe add a little bit more, and constantly looking to extend the amount of information that they publish. In terms of the information that's published, I'm not going to dwell too much on this because this is really going to be the main part of the next webinar that Liz has already mentioned that we're doing at the same time, or next week at the same time, I think, and where we're going to look in more detail at the actual information that's required to be published. What I would just say at this point is that what a lot of organisations find is that when they start to source where this information that is required is within their own organisations, quite often it will start to shine a light on where your own organisations may have information gaps, where the actual required information may not be in your main IT systems or your back-end systems. It might be in somebody's head, it might be on a spreadsheet. So just really to be aware that that's not an uncommon thing that happens when you're publishing, but just something to be aware of, to think about when you're trying to source the information that is required. We also know as well that sometimes organisations, there's information you don't want to put in the public domain. I said right at the very beginning, IATI is a voluntary standard, so in terms of what is and isn't published, always remains the decision of the publisher. The publisher is the data owner and has complete control over that data. So it is always the decision, as I say, of the publishing organisation as to what information is not put out. And exclude, the reasons why you might not want to publish certain information might be because you've got staff working in a fragile state or a war zone, or you don't want to put the communities that they're working with at risk because of the particular intervention that's been taking place. There may be privacy or stakeholder permission issues. So again, if you're thinking of just starting the publishing process, we always advise that if you're going to reference other organisations, you make sure they are aware that you're going to do so and are happy for you to do so as well, and you have their permission. And similarly, and this happens a lot with the financing institutions, sometimes they can't put out financial information because it's covered by commercial confidentiality. And similarly with financial thresholds or limits. So when we get into the detail of publishing IATI, a lot of that is financial, but we don't necessarily expect organisations to publish every single financial transaction that they make. Normally, we would, most organisations will aggregate their transactions for their publishing period that they're updating their data for. So maybe if they're doing it quarterly, they'll aggregate all their transactions for a particular category, for instance, or to a particular supplier, can aggregate that up and just publish a single transaction for that last quarter or the last month or whatever. But again, those thresholds remain the decision of the publisher. Some organisations, smaller organisations, are able to publish, pretty much all their information. Some of the larger organisations, they just couldn't even get close to it, so they look at publishing transactions over a certain rate. And then in terms of the actual mechanics of publishing, just to sort of explain how this works, essentially the output, what we require of our publishers is the bit in the middle really, the IATI XML file. So basically, a publisher produces a file of information which is formatted using XML. You don't have to be XML experts, so don't worry about that. We're not expecting everyone to be an XML expert, so there are ways around it. So we have information in an organisational file, which tends to be information about the organisation itself. So that will be, links to annual reports, budgets for the entire organisation. And then most of the information is contained in activity files. So this is where our organisations publish information about their projects or programmes or grants or whatever they decided their units of aid is going to be. And some publishers have a very large number of activity files just due to the huge amount of activities or interventions that they're involved in. So as I say, you don't have to be an XML expert. Our smaller organisations tend to use online IATI publishing tools. So some of you may be familiar with a publishing tool called AidStream. It's free. You can go onto the internet, go to aidstream.org, you can create an account and you can start publishing IATI data today. It's great if you've got a small amount of data to input because you can enter the data manually. There's also a CSV import facility on that as well. So if you're collating information from different systems into a CSV, you can upload it. And then once you've got your account set up, You know, it does all the hard work for you. You input your data, and then you can get to a point, you press the publish button, and it generates out the XML files. Similarly, if you're perhaps a larger organisation and looking to develop your own in-house applications or scripts that pulls all the required data from your systems and then generates out and creates the XML files yourself. So that tends to be, you know, our larger sort of donor governments and the multilateral organisations that do that. Once you have your XML files, in order to be a recognised and public publisher, we also require that you have to create an account on the IATI registry. So every publisher, every organisation that's already publishing, you can go to the IATI registry and see a list of every single organisation that's publishing. However, the one thing I need to stress is that when you have created your XML files, you don't give them to IATI as such, and you don't give them to us. If you're a large organisation, we recommend that you create your XML files and then host them somewhere on your own internal web servers or somewhere where they can be accessed via the internet. And then what the registry actually does is, what you update the registry is to include the URL of where those files live. So the registry is essentially, as its name suggests, it's a register of who is publishing and where their IATI data lives. So that data can be anywhere in the world. So that data is not in any way owned or curated for us. And the reason we ask or get our publishers to manage the data and host it on their own web servers is from a question of integrity. You know, I make the point, I continually make the point that the data that you publish is your own organisational data. So obviously by hosting it on your own website, it comes with that integrity that it is still managed and controlled by you and has not been passed to somebody else who could potentially interfere with it. In terms of the use of the online tools, the XML files that are generated from those are effectively hosted by the tool itself. Some publishers do choose to copy them from the tool onto their own web servers, and you know, we would certainly encourage publishers to do that. But the way some of these tools work is they'll actually, when you update your data, they also do all the relevant updating on the IATI registry as well. So once you've got that set up, as AidStream does, once you've got AidStream set up, you can actually link it to your own registry account, your own IATI registry account, so that when you publish your data, it handles all that publishing for you and makes it a lot easier. So, and just finally, just a few things to remember. So this point that I've mentioned several times, the publisher always owns and controls the data. So it's not ours, it's not IATI data, it belongs to the organisation. And you know, so in terms of what content is included, how that data is managed, all rests, any decisions about the data at all always lie with the publisher. We know very well that transparency builds trust. I mean, there's a lot of industry evidence and to support the fact that when organisations are being much more open, that it does build trust with their stakeholders, with the wider public, with the people that they want to obviously work with. Also to think about when you're publishing your information about the content, that it's really trying to tell a story. We always say to our publishers, I try and remind them that in some ways you should view publishing to IATI as a communications exercise. You know, you're putting information into the public domain about the work that you do. So sometimes it may not be helpful to put some information out there with the title of project as Project XYZ. You know, it's actually think about how that data is presented to try and make it as meaningful and as useful to anyone who might want to use it. And similarly as well, you know, always be mindful once you're publishing or even before you're publishing, you know, about using not only your own data for your own benefit, but the data of others as well. So just recently I was talking to a colleague in a large NGO who was telling me about a new project that they were about to start and saying that they were going to go to these organisations to get their data. And when he suddenly realised that actually all the data he wanted was already available in their IATI files. So rather than constantly developing bespoke solutions and specific data asks, you know, that data was already available to be used.
Yes, final question. Should we try and open this box up, Wendy, and see what questions we've got here? So if we go down, I think we've probably got a lot down here. Just let's give a big idea of what we've got. Lots of questions. Okay, are you separating, this is from Ava, are you separating between humanitarian action and long-term development interventions, or should both of these be reported to IATI?
Yeah, the simple answer is both. In terms of we're not making any distinction. I know there has long been a debate about what actually is humanitarian and what is development, and I don't think any consensus has ever been reached in terms of what makes one activity a humanitarian activity and as and when it then becomes a development activity. So the way that we handle that in IATI is we leave it entirely up to the publisher to decide. You know, you will have your own working practices and your own sort of business rules around what you decide is humanitarian and what you decide is development. So we allow the publishers to self-select essentially when they are reporting as to what they tag as humanitarian and what is effectively left as development or any other type of intervention for that matter. Okay, we've got another question just above that from Caroline, thank you. I've just lost it now. Has it gone up? Oh yeah, can publishers take down data after the fact? Normally we would say as a principle, once data has been published, we normally ask our publishers not to remove it, so even over time, so you start to over time build up a very large data set, you know, particularly as projects close and you move on to new work. However, we would say that if data was published, and we have had instances where publishers have inadvertently published information, you know, that does fall into the sort of, you know, the issues of security or privacy. And certainly there is no issue, you know, if something has been put into the public domain when clearly it shouldn't have, then certainly that can be taken down. But generally as a rule, we would say once published, it should remain published.
Yeah, I think it's kind of linked. There's a previous question from Mohammed about is anonymous submission, I think, available for those working in security complicated areas and have concerns about publishing their info publicly.
Yeah, I mean,
you covered about exemptions.
Yeah, so when I talked about the exclusions and exemptions, as I say, you know, there is no mandate that you have to publish everything. It has to be at the discretion of you as the publishing organisation. So if there is information that you know of a sensitive nature, then it needn't be obviously reported.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, good question about duplicate reporting partners and donors. Yeah. So what we're actually trying to do in IATI is build up an entire picture of the sort of funding and the delivery chain. So as money moves through the system, what we're trying to do with IATI is obviously be able to track that, so that the originating donor has the money, they might pass that money perhaps even to a fund manager who then disperses it to an implementing agency, perhaps an INGO, who then passes it on to their NGO in country, and then who might be working with a local NGO. So the way IATI works is that you know that we want to be able to track that money, but again the general principle around that is that an organisation should only publish the money that it itself is handling. So if you were working with a partner organisation, for instance, you know, and they've got half the money and you've got half the money, you as an organisation only report the part of the money that you are responsible for and that you is handling. So essentially anything that goes through your own bank accounts, if it's not going through your bank accounts, then you don't need to report it to IATI. I think that's probably the best rule of thumb.
Yeah, I've got another good question from Caroline about, have donors expressed willingness to use IATI data rather than a specific financial report? Well, I know of the case in, I think, the Netherlands. The Dutch government is currently requesting that or I think it's a requirement that its implementing partners publish to IATI, and they're using that information as their, I'm not sure if it's their financial report, but certainly as their part of the reporting requirement. Do you want to talk? Have we kind of covered double counting there?
Yeah.
How you want to go back a bit? Or do you want to cover that one? No. What would success or fulfilment of the Grand Bargain commitment look like functionally? Oh yeah. So this is. I mean, in terms of how this is going to be measured, this is very much part of the consultation process. So obviously we're looking at the objective is for the to increase the availability of high quality, open, comparable data on humanitarian funding. But I think this is very much part of the consultation process. So we'd like to hear from you, and we'd very much like you to engage on that to enable us to establish. We'll start with a baseline, but then we'll obviously need to develop some criteria against which that can be monitored. Should we go down? Have we got any new ones at the bottom here?
So there's a question from
Matteo,
yeah, saying about being interested to know how the publishing process is dealt by large organisations, which department. I can tell you that there is no standard approach, I'm afraid. Normally it's down to each organisation. Some will deal with it as a financial reporting requirement, some will do it from an M&E perspective, so from a measurement and evaluation. You know, others will actually maybe just do it in terms of giving it to the program managers to manage, and they each self-report their little part of it. So I think probably the most common is it's dealt with through as financial reporting, but there isn't really any hard and fast rule as to how organisations deal with it. Certainly what most large organisations do, and I think is good practice, is establishing a sort of transparency champion. So because obviously IATI data needs information drawn from financial systems, from programming systems, maybe even HR, you know, the whole sort of basically all of your back-end systems. Very rarely is there someone in the organisation apart from the chief exec who has some sort of oversight of all of those. So a lot of the larger organisations will appoint, as I say, a transparency person who will take this on as their responsibility, and that person has the authority then to go and consult with the different departments in terms of curating and getting that data pulled. And on top of that as well, that's why I say it's very important to make sure your senior management team is brought in, because if you haven't got that top level cover, you know, it can be really difficult for someone at the coalface to go to the finance manager to ask for data on a regular basis when, you know, they don't necessarily have the authority to do that.
Sorry, we're just going down and going through them.
Okay, so there's just a question, good question about if organisations decide how to categorise their data, like programme, project, or grant, etc. If everyone has a different category, how do you build a larger picture? There's no way to compare apples to apples. Well, I would say the way we do that is in IATI terms, they all become just activities. So it doesn't matter that the activity is a grant, it doesn't matter that it's a project. We are just looking in IATI terms as activities. And you are, you know, effectively telling the story of what that activity is doing. So whether it only has a small amount of funding or it has a huge amount of funding from many different stakeholders, it doesn't really matter. So the sort of levelling currency, as I say, is actually built into the standard by having this concept of an activity, which is not tied to a particular programme or project structure.
Good one here, I think, about organisational identifiers. This is again from Matteo.
Yeah.
There's no. Oh, is there a repository for organisational identifiers? It's usually difficult to find them out to tag all collaborating organisations.
Yeah, we are aware that this is an issue. I mean, the easiest thing is obviously just to go to the registry and pull them out from there. But I appreciate that there's no automated solution as yet. It is something we've had for a long time on our work plan to try and provide some sort of automated mechanism for that. So, you know, you could download a list and effectively pull them into your own IT systems then to use. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist at the moment, but as I say, it is something we are aware of.
Scroll down, Wendy. We've got one here about transactions. We've got 3 questions from Susan. Look here. Yes, how effective is IATI in tracking the data if it's based on limits, i.e. transactions over a certain amount, or through aggregates? Okay, and the answer to that is, one thing I should say about IATI, and it's good to dispel this perception, it's not intended to be an accounting system. There are no inbuilt reconciliations or any accounting processes as such that you would recognise from probably your main internal financial systems in IATI. Deliberately so, because what IATI is trying to do is show that broader picture. So it doesn't necessarily, at this stage, I'm not going to say, I wouldn't ever preempt how things might change in the future, but at this stage it is about showing the broader picture and being able to show in those broader terms those flows through, as I say, the funding and the delivery chain. And then there's another question on relatively large organisations have a lot of activities. Do you lose some activities when publishing? Is that the case? I guess it depends how automated it is.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, this goes back to the principle where we would say once an activity has been published, you know, once it's been published and made public, then it should never be removed. it should be there for posterity. So we wouldn't expect data activities to be lost. We would certainly want our publishers to, having published it, then maintain that that particular activity.
And then a question about the future of IATI. Is it sustainable in the long term if it is voluntary? Well, I would say we certainly hope so. I mean, IATI has been going now as a standard since 2010,
2011.
And with currently over 500 publishers. And in fact, we did a little analysis before we started the webinar, and already 60% of Grand Bargain signatories are already publishing their data to IATI, to the standard. So for sure, we see it as being sustainable in the future. And of course, the more and more the organisations publish to IATI, the more people are using the data. Then, as Wendy explained, then obviously the longer it can continue.
One final question?
Yeah, I think we'll have one final question and we'll wrap up. So what have we got down here?
Yeah, so from Emily. Yeah. Emily is asking, does IATI provide universal terms for the delivery and distribution of aid items? For example, a shared term for a tent or blanket, or is it only being used for dollar figures? Well, the answer to that is, at the moment, Emily, in terms of showing a transfer, is primarily around financial figures. But we do know that we have looked at this as an issue, and we are looking at better ways of reporting effectively in kind, or where aid is being dispersed, or the use of cash and vouchers is being used as well. So that's very high up our list at the moment, and we're looking at better ways in terms of reporting that information, because we realise that's sort of quite key and quite a fundamental ask from the humanitarian community.
Okay, so if we move on to next steps, Wendy, and we'll wrap up so you can all get back to your work. We'll be sending out a recording of the webinar and slides over the next few days and posting these on the web link, and we'll try and cover any of the answers we didn't manage to any of the questions we didn't manage to answer today. So we'll ensure they're included, and we'll be also sending out an online survey to Grand Bargain signatories to get your views on some of the challenges but also the incentives for publication to IATI from within your own organisation. If this has whetted your appetite on publishing your information to IATI, please do join us for session 2 on Thursday, the 2nd of March. It's the same time. And this session will explain how data is published, the types of information required, as Wendy said, going into a bit more detail, and what kind of monitoring and support is available to publishers. We've also just released a new background paper, an introduction to IATI for humanitarian actors, which you can find online on the web link provided there, on the first web link on the page. Sorry, the last one. And thank you once again for joining. Please do get in touch with any further queries or questions. We're here to help, and we'll be sending out contact details in the follow-up to the webinar. So thank you. Thanks from me, and thanks from Wendy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.